Welcome to Midnight Truth, where peaceful stories guide you into the perfect night's rest. Before we start, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. It helps me bring more soothing stories to you and others who need them. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, find your cozy spot, close your eyes, and let's begin this calming journey together. I never thought I'd end up in a place like this. After the divorce finalized last month, I needed a fresh start, something completely different from the suburban hell I've been living in for the past 10 years. That's how I found myself standing in front of 42 Elmwood Drive, keys in hand, staring at what will become my new home. The house looked like it had been plucked straight out of a Victorian novel, 3 stories tall with peeling gray paint and intricate gingerbread trim that seemed to mock me with its fading grandeur. The porch sagged slightly in the middle, and several of the windows had cracks running through them like spider webs. But despite its obvious flaws, there was something about the place that spoke to me. Maybe it was the price, or perhaps the way it stood alone at the end of the street, separated from the other houses by an overgrown hedge. Moving day was a blur of boxes and sweat. The air inside smelled musty, like old books and damp wood, but I told myself it was just a scent of history. The real estate agent had warned me about the creaky floorboards, but I hadn't expected them to sound like gunshots every time I took a step. By the time I finished unpacking the essentials, my nerves were shot, and my ears were ringing from the constant groaning of settling wood. The first night was the hardest. Every little sound made me jump. The wind rattling the loose shutters, the pipes groaning as the hot water heater kicked on, the occasional thump from upstairs that I convinced myself was just the house adjusting to its new occupant. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the symphony of creaks and groans that seemed to come alive after dark. My daily routine quickly fell into place. Wake up at 6, shower in the ancient clawfoot tub that took forever to heat up, make coffee in the tiny kitchen where the cabinets always seemed to be slightly ajar, no matter how many times I closed them. During the day, I worked from home as a graphic designer, setting up my laptop in what I hope will become a cozy office space in the front room. The house had its quirks, sure. The door to the basement stuck, unless you jiggled the handle just right. The hallway light flickered occasionally, casting strange shadows across the floor wallpaper. And there was this one spot in the living room where the floor felt unusually cold, even on the warmest days. But these were normal things, right? Old houses always had their personality, their little idiosyncrasies that made them unique. What really got to me, though, was the smell. It wasn't constant, but sometimes, especially late at night, I'd catch whiffs of something sweet and sickly, like rotting flowers mixed with old perfume. I tried airing out the place, spraying air freshener, even burning candles, but nothing seemed to make it go away completely. My rational mind told me it was probably just trapped in the walls or something, but there were moments when the scent would suddenly appear, so strong it made my stomach churn, that I couldn't help wondering if maybe it wasn't so simple. Despite these minor annoyances, I was determined to make this work. This house represented my independence, my chance to rebuild my life on my own terms. Plus, the rent was dirt cheap for such a large space, and location-wise it was perfect, close enough to downtown for convenience, but far enough away to feel secluded. As I settled into my second week, I started to think maybe I'd finally found my sanctuary, my safe haven away from all the chaos of my previous life. It wasn't until the third day that I met Mrs. Hargrove, my neighbor from across the street. She appeared on my porch like a ghost, her thin frame wrapped in a faded housecoat, her silver hair pulled back into a severe bun. I'd been trying to fix the stubborn front door lock when she called out, making me jump so hard I nearly dropped my screwdriver. "You're the new tenant," she stated rather than asked, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd lived long enough to see everything. Up close, I noticed a network of fine lines around her eyes and mouth, and the way her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her knitting bag. "I've been watching you move in." Yes," I stammered, feeling suddenly self-conscious about my paint-splattered jeans and unbrushed hair. "I'm Alex. Just moved in last week." She nodded slowly, her gaze sweeping over the house behind me. For a moment, she looked like she might say something important. But then she just pursed her lips and adjusted her glasses. "You'll want to be careful here," she said finally, her words hanging in the air like smoke. This house, it's not like the others. Before I could ask what she meant, she launched into a story about the previous tenants, a young family who'd lasted barely 3 months before fleeing in the middle of the night. According to Mrs. Hargrove, they'd been seen running down the street in their pajamas, screaming about voices and shadows that weren't supposed to exist. The police had been called, but by the time they arrived, the house was empty except for overturned furniture and shattered mirrors. As she spoke, I couldn't help noticing how her eyes kept darting toward my windows, like she expected something to appear there. Her hands twisted nervously in her lap, and though the afternoon sun warmed the porch, she shivered as if caught in a draft. There was another family before them, she continued, lowering her voice. They didn't even make it 2 weeks. The father kept talking about seeing his dead mother in the mirror, and the children refused to sleep upstairs. Mrs. Hargrove leaned closer, her breath smelling faintly of mint and something bitter I couldn't identify. But the worst was the couple before that. They were here for nearly a year, and that's when the real trouble started. People said they heard chanting coming from the basement at all hours, saw strange symbols painted on the windows. One night, the whole neighborhood woke up to blood-curdling screams. When the police broke in, they found the wife huddled in a corner, babbling about doors that shouldn't exist and creatures that watch from the shadows. Her voice dropped to a whisper, barely audible over the wind rustling through the trees. The husband was never found, just disappeared without a trace. She gripped my arm suddenly, her fingers surprisingly strong for someone so frail. Be careful, dear. Some places aren't meant to be lived in. That night, as I lay in bed replaying her words in my mind, I noticed something odd. The cold spot in the living room had spread, now encompassing most of the downstairs. My breath misted in the air as I walked through the house, checking windows and doors. The sweet, sickly smell was stronger tonight, almost overwhelming, and no matter how many times I opened windows, it lingered like a bad memory. I tried to shake off Mrs. Hargrove's warnings as the ramblings of an old woman with too much time on her hands. But as I climbed the stairs to bed, each step sounding impossibly loud in the silence, I couldn't help remembering how she looked at my house. Not with curiosity or nostalgia, but with something that resembled genuine fear. The strange occurrences began subtly, almost apologetically, as if whatever haunted the house was testing its boundaries. At first, it was just the ordinary sound of an old house settling. Or so I told myself. The creak of floorboards as temperatures change, the groan of pipes expanding and contracting. But soon, these familiar noises transformed into something more deliberate, more calculated. It started with footsteps, not the heavy, lumbering kind that might belong to a burglar or intruder, but soft, measured steps that seemed to echo through the halls late at night. I'd lie awake in bed, listening to them pace back and forth above me, sometimes stopping directly over my head as if whoever, or whatever, was walking had paused to listen too. Each time I mustered the courage to investigate, the sounds would stop abruptly, leaving me standing in the dark hallway, with only the sound of my own breathing for company. Then came the whispers, barely audible at first, like distant conversations carried on the wind. They grew clearer with each passing night. I'd be working late in my makeshift office when I'd hear them, fragments of words spoken in voices that sounded both familiar and foreign. Sometimes they came from the walls themselves, other times from empty rooms I just left. Once, while washing dishes, I distinctly heard someone breathe my name right behind me, so close I could feel the warmth against my neck. When I spun around, heart pounding, there was nothing but the cold kitchen and the reflection of my terrified face in the window. The temperature fluctuations became impossible to ignore. Entire sections of the house would grow ice cold without warning, frost forming on the inside of windows in midsummer. My digital thermometer showed readings that made no sense. 70 degrees in the living room, 40 in the hallway, 90 in the kitchen, all within minutes of each other. The cold spots followed no logical pattern, appearing and disappearing like ghosts themselves. I bought extra blankets and space heaters, but they did little to combat the chill that seemed to seep into my bones. Perhaps most unsettling were the smells. The sweet, rotting flower scent intensified, sometimes mixing with other odors, burnt hair, wet earth, something metallic that made my stomach turn. These smells would appear in specific rooms at specific times, as if marking territory. The guest bedroom reeked of sulfur every Tuesday evening. The study filled with the aroma of funeral flowers each Thursday morning. I started keeping detailed notes, trying to find a pattern, some rational explanation for these olfactory apparitions. Sleep became impossible. Even with white noise machines and earplugs, the house remained alive around me, its wooden bones shifting and sighing, its unseen inhabitants communicating in ways I couldn't understand. I developed dark circles under my eyes, and my work suffered as exhaustion clouded my thoughts. Still, I dismissed it all as stress, fatigue, and overactive imagination. This was just an old house. I told myself repeatedly, houses don't have intentions. They don't watch you. They don't wait. But the house did wait. It watched. I could feel its presence growing stronger, more confident with each passing day. The footsteps became heavier, more purposeful. The whispers turned into full sentences, though still in languages I couldn't comprehend. Objects began moving. Small things at first, like pens rolling off desks or picture frames tilting at odd angles. Then larger items shifted position overnight. Chairs moved away from tables. Books rearranged themselves on shelves. My favorite mug appeared in rooms I hadn't entered in days. One night, unable to sleep, I sat in the dark living room with a notebook, documenting every sound, every movement, every change in temperature. The house responded immediately, as if aware of my scrutiny. The air grew thick and heavy, pressing against my skin like wet wool. The whispers became a chorus, overlapping voices speaking in urgent tones. Something brushed against my ankle, something cold and solid that definitely wasn't my cat. My pen froze midward as I stared at the empty space beside me, certain I wasn't alone. Yet when I turned on the lights, everything appeared normal. The furniture stood where it should. The windows remained sealed, the doors locked tight. My rational mind screamed at me to leave, to pack my bags and run. But something deeper rooted me to the spot. Curiosity? Stubbornness? Or perhaps something more sinister. The house itself, weaving its spell around me, drawing me deeper into its mystery. The library's local history section smelled of dust and forgotten knowledge. Exactly what I needed to distract myself from the growing unease in my chest. I spent hours poring over brittle newspaper clippings and yellow property records, tracing the house's lineage back to its original construction in 1892. What I discovered chilled me more than any midnight whisper or phantom footsteps ever could. Ezekiel Whitmore, the house's first owner, was a man who defied easy categorization, born into wealth and privilege. He abandoned his family's textile business to pursue what contemporary accounts described as mystical studies. His journals, meticulously preserved in the Historical Society's archives, revealed an obsession with contacting the dead and unlocking what he called the hidden dimensions. He wrote extensively about creating doorways between worlds, using complex geometric patterns and incantations derived from obscure occult texts. The more I read, the more disturbed I became. Whitmore's writings grew increasingly erratic over time, his neat handwriting deteriorating into frantic scrawls. He documented elaborate rituals performed in the house's basement, describing how he painted symbols on the walls using the essence of transition, a mixture he claimed contained human ashes and rare herbs. Most chilling were his claims of success. Passages describing shadowy figures watching him from corners of rooms, voices whispering secrets in languages he swore he'd never learned. Local legends painted an even darker picture. Town elders spoke in hushed tones about strange lights emanating from the house at night, about disappearances of livestock and pets in the surrounding area. Several families reportedly attempted to purchase the property after Whitmore's death in 1913, only to flee within weeks, claiming the house was alive and hostile to their presence. One particularly disturbing account described a child who vanished while playing in the backyard, only to reappear days later miles away. Speaking of the man in the mirror, who had shown her secret passages beneath the house. The Historical Society's curator, an elderly woman named Margaret, seemed reluctant to discuss Whitmore's activities. When pressed, she admitted that many believed he had successfully opened a portal to another realm, but at terrible cost. He wasn't just summoning spirits, she whispered, glancing nervously at the closed door of the archive room. He was trading pieces of himself, his memories, his humanity. By the end, people said he didn't even look human anymore. As I delved deeper into Whitmore's research, I began recognizing patterns in the house's behavior. The cold spots corresponded perfectly with locations mentioned in his journals as convergence points. The sweet, sickly smell matched descriptions of a threshold scent he claimed indicated successful dimensional breaches. Even the whispers seemed to follow rhythms and cadences noted in his ritual instructions. The most alarming discovery came when I found blueprints of the house's original design. They showed a network of hidden passages and chambers not visible in the current structure, including a sealed-off wing on the second floor and a sub-basement level below the main cellar. Cross-referencing these with modern building records revealed discrepancies that sent chills down my spine. Measurements that didn't add up, walls that shouldn't exist, spaces that seemed to occupy the same physical area simultaneously. By the time I returned home that evening, my hands trembled so badly I could barely unlock the front door. The house seemed to recognize my new understanding, responding with an intensity that bordered on aggression. The air crackled with electricity, and the whispers erupted into a deafening cacophony as soon as I crossed the threshold. In that moment, I knew I'd stumbled upon something far beyond my comprehension, something that had been waiting patiently for someone to rediscover its secrets. The journal found me rather than the other way around. I'd been searching to the attic's cramped confine for insulation material when my hand brushed against something hard and leather-bound tucked behind a loose board in the wall. The moment my fingers touched it, the house seemed to hold its breath, the usual creaks and groans falling silent as if anticipating my discovery. Dusty and cracked with age, the journal bore Ezekiel Whitmore's initials embossed on the cover. As I carefully opened it, a wave of that sickly sweet smell wafted out, stronger than I'd ever experienced before. The pages inside were filled with meticulous handwriting, diagrams, and pressed flowers that crumbled to dust at the slightest touch. But it was the entries detailing his final experiments that made my blood run cold. Whitmore's last months were consumed by what he called the Grand Convergence. He wrote of creating a permanent bridge between worlds, not just opening temporary portals as he'd done before. His notes described a complex ritual involving 7 participants, each representing a different aspect of human consciousness, all connected through a web of sigils painted in their own blood. The basement, he explained, served as a focal point. Its geometry aligned with ley lines he claimed ran beneath the property. Most disturbing were his observations about the house itself. Whitmore documented how it began changing after his initial experiments. Walls shifting positions overnight, new rooms appearing where none had existed before, entire sections of the house becoming inaccessible at random intervals. He noted with scientific detachment how the building seemed to develop preferences, allowing certain people entry while barring others, as if it were developing a will of its own. The final entry stopped my heart. Dated October 13, 1913, it described a catastrophic event Whitmore termed a fracture. Apparently, during the climactic ritual, something went wrong, terribly wrong. The journal's pages were stained with what looked like dried blood as he frantically recorded events. Participants screaming as their bodies contorted into impossible shapes, walls bleeding black ichor, the air filling with a sound he described as 1,000 souls weeping in perfect harmony. "They are here," he wrote in shaking script. "Not just the ones I summoned, but others, beings from realms I never intended to contact. The house has become their vessel, their anchor to this world. I can feel them watching, learning, adapting. They are hungry, but not for flesh or blood. They consume identity, memory, soul." The last paragraph was almost illegible, written with such force that the nib had torn to the paper in places. "I have failed. The barriers are breaking. They know my weaknesses now. Know that I created this prison for myself when I sought to control them. If anyone finds this journal, destroy it immediately. Burn it. Reduce it to ash. Because if they learn what I've learned..." The entry ended abruptly, the rest of the page ripped away. As I stared at the torn edges, I realized with growing horror that the journal's contents explained everything. The moving walls, the temperature fluctuations, the mysterious smells. The house wasn't just haunted, it was possessed. Whitmore hadn't just opened doors to other dimensions. He'd invited entities to take up residence within the very fabric of the building itself. Suddenly, the house reacted violently to my discovery. The attic plunged into darkness, as if someone had extinguished the sun itself. The air pressure dropped dramatically, making my ears pop. A chorus of voices erupted around me. Not the usual whispers, but full-throated screams in dozens of languages, overlapping and echoing until they formed a single, deafening roar. The journal vibrated in my hands, growing hotter by the second until I had to drop it to avoid burns. Cowering against the attic wall, I watched in terror as the journal began to move on its own, pages flipping rapidly as if an invisible reader were scanning its contents. The pressed flowers burst into flames that burned cold, spreading across the floor in patterns matching Whitmore sigils. The house seemed to be digesting the information, integrating it into its consciousness, when the phenomena subsided minutes later. Leaving me gasping for breath in the suddenly stifling heat, the journal lay open to a blank page. All traces of writing had vanished, as if the house had absorbed every word, every secret. But something else had changed. The atmosphere itself felt heavier, more focused. Whatever intelligence inhabited the house now knew that I knew, and it was watching me with renewed interest. The house's attention became unbearable, a constant pressure against my skin like static electricity before a storm. It watched me with eyes I couldn't see, tracked my movements through rooms that seemed to shift and change when my back was turned. Doors that had always stuck now opened smoothly, inviting me into spaces I'd avoided. The sealed-off wing upstairs, the narrow closet beneath the stairs, the trapdoor leading to the sub-basement. Each doorway pulsed with that sickly sweet smell, beckoning me forward like a siren's call. I fought back in small ways at first, trying to maintain some semblance of control. I marked door frames with salt, hung iron horseshoes above windows, played recordings of white noise to drown out the whispers. But the house adapted, evolving its tactics with terrifying speed. The salt lines dissolved into puddles of brine overnight. The horseshoes rusted to powder within hours. The white noise recordings reversed themselves, playing back distorted versions of my own voice, saying things I didn't remember speaking. My attempts to leave became increasingly difficult. Cars wouldn't start, keys disappeared. Roads seemed to twist and turn in impossible directions. Once, I managed to reach the highway, only to find myself driving in circles, returning to Elmwood Drive no matter which exit I took. The house wanted me to stay, needed me to stay, and it would manipulate reality itself to ensure compliance. Sleep became a battleground. The mattress seemed to sink lower each night, as if the bed were gradually being pulled into floor. Cold fingers traced patterns on my skin, while I lay paralyzed, unable to scream or move. Sometimes I'd wake to find objects arranged around me in precise geometric patterns, my shoes forming pentagrams, my clothes draped over furniture in shapes that matched Whitmore sigils. Other times, I'd find myself in different rooms entirely, as if the house had transported me while I slept. The psychological toll mounted quickly. I started seeing faces and reflections, not my own, but distorted visages with too many eyes or mouths stretched impossibly wide. Mirrors became dangerous, showing scenes that didn't match reality. Empty rooms filled with shadowy figures. Staircases leading to nowhere, versions of myself performing actions I hadn't taken. I smashed several mirrors in desperation, only to find their shards continuing to reflect images from impossible angles, embedded in walls and floors. The worst manifestations occurred in the basement. Drawn there against my will by an irresistible compulsion, I found the space transformed. The concrete walls bore fresh markings, glowing runes that pulsed with a light that seemed to come within the stone itself. The air hummed with energy, raising the hairs on my arms. In the center of the room stood a circle of stones, each inscribed with symbols that made my head ache just looking at them. When I stepped inside, the temperature plummeted and the whispers became a deafening chorus of voices speaking in perfect unison. We know you. We see you. You cannot hide. Panic attacks became daily occurrences. Sometimes I'd find myself standing in rooms with no memory of how I'd gotten there, holding objects I didn't remember picking up. My reflection in windows showed a person aging rapidly, features growing gaunt and hollow-eyed. Food tasted wrong. Water felt thick and oily going down my throat. The house was consuming me piece by piece, erasing my identity while simultaneously forcing me to confront aspects of myself I'd rather forget. Reality itself began unraveling. Time flowed inconsistently. Hours passed in what felt like minutes, or seconds stretched into eternity. Rooms changed size and shape depending on my emotional state. The backyard fence seemed to move closer each day, shrinking the property inch by inch. Once, I caught sight of Mrs. Hargrove through the living room window, but when I opened the door, she was gone, and the street outside looked completely different. As if a decade had passed in an instant, the house played games with my mind, creating scenarios that felt real until they suddenly weren't. Conversations with imaginary friends, phone calls from numbers that didn't exist, vivid dreams that bled into waking life. I began questioning everything. Which memories were mine, which were planted by the house, which might belong to previous tenants whose identities it had absorbed. The line between myself and the house blurred, until I wasn't sure where one ended and the other began. Chapter 7, The Gathering Storm. The house's transformation accelerated with terrifying speed. Walls oozed black ichor that crystallized into jagged spikes before dissolving into mist. Floorboards buckled and warped, creating impossible angles that defied physics. The air grew thick with the smell of ozone and decay, making each breath taste of metal and rot. Shadows moved independently of their sources, pulling in corners and stretching toward me with tendril-like appendages that dripped viscous liquid. The manifestations became physical and aggressive. Doors slammed with enough force to shatter glass. Windows exploded inward, showering rooms with glittering shards that hung suspended in midair before forming into grotesque shapes. Faces screaming silently, hands reaching desperately. Furniture rearranged itself into disturbing configurations. Chairs stacked precariously high, tables inverted to form altars, beds folded into impossible origami structures that seemed to pulse with inner life. In the basement, the stone circle had grown, its runes now carved deep into the foundation itself. The symbols glowed with increasing intensity, casting the entire space in sickly green light that made my skin appear translucent, revealing the skeletal structure beneath. The humming had evolved into a low, guttural chant that resonated through my bones, vibrating internal organs in ways that made me nauseous. Black smoke coiled from the cracks between stones, forming humanoid shapes that danced and writhed in macabre celebration. Each night brought new terrors. The cold spots solidified into tangible forms, icy hands that grasped at my limbs, freezing breath that fogged the air in patterns matching Whitmore sigils. The whispers organized into choirs, singing hymns in languages that caused nosebleeds and migraines. Objects didn't just move, they attacked. Picture frames flew across rooms like projectiles, their glass splintering into razor-sharp shards. Books launched themselves from shelves, pages fluttering like wings before disintegrating into clouds of ash that burned my skin on contact. The upper floors became labyrinths of shifting corridors and impossible geometry. Staircases led to ceilings instead of floors. Hallways looped back on themselves. Doors opened into other dimensions where gravity worked differently and colors didn't exist. I found myself trapped in Escher-like constructs where perspective shifted unpredictably, causing vertigo and disorientation. The house seemed to be folding in on itself, creating pocket dimensions within its walls that pulsed with malevolent energy. The sealed-off wing revealed itself one night, its door materializing in a wall that hadn't existed hours before. Inside, I discovered rooms frozen in time, previous tenants' belongings arranged as if their owners had just stepped out. Children's toys moved of their own accord. Dolls turned their heads to watch me pass. Family portraits displayed faces that changed expression when viewed from different angles, mouths stretching into rictus grins, eyes rolling back to show bloody scara. The sub-basement proved worst of all. Access through a trapdoor that appeared in the kitchen floor. It housed a vast chamber filled with organic machinery, pulsating tubes that pumped black liquid through veined conduits, fleshy valves that contracted and expanded like hearts, clusters of eyes that blinked in synchronized patterns. The air down there tasted of copper and ammonia, and the temperature fluctuated wildly between searing heat and Arctic cold. Something massive shifted in the darkness beyond the illuminated area, its movements causing the entire house to tremble. These manifestations followed patterns that matched Whitmore's final journal entries. The house was preparing for something gathering energy, aligning forces, constructing pathways between worlds. I could feel it in the way the manifestations crescendoed and subsided, building towards some climactic event. The entities were organizing, coordinating their efforts, learning from each interaction with me. Their intelligence was undeniable, their purpose clear. To complete what Whitmore had started, to fully merge dimensions and claim this reality as their own. Every attempt to document these events resulted in failure. Cameras malfunctioned. Recording equipment captured only static. Notebooks filled themselves with indecipherable symbols that burned when touched. The house wouldn't allow evidence of its true nature to exist, erasing proof as quickly as it manifested. Yet the effects on my body were undeniable. Bruises appearing without cause, cuts that wouldn't heal, hair turning white overnight. The house was marking me, claiming me as part of its collection, integrating me into its nightmare architecture. The culmination began on a night when time itself seemed to fracture. My digital clock displayed impossible sequences. 3:33, 6 hours 66 minutes, 9 hours 99 minutes, while analog watches spun their hands in opposite directions. The air pressure dropped so dramatically that my ears popped painfully, and the house groaned as if its very foundations were being twisted apart. From every surface, the sickly sweet smell poured forth in waves, saturating the atmosphere until breathing became an act of desperation. I found myself drawn inexorably to the basement, my feet moving against my way down the creaking stairs. The stone circle now dominated the entire space, its runes blazing with blinding intensity. The black smoke had condensed into solid forms, humanoid figures with elongated limbs and featureless faces, their bodies rippling like liquid mercury. They moved in perfect synchronization, performing complex gestures that made the air vibrate with harmonic resonance. At the circle's center stood a figure both familiar and alien. It wore Ezekiel Whitmore's face, but distorted, eyes too large, mouth too wide, skin stretched taut over unnatural bone structure. Its voice emerged from everywhere and nowhere, a chorus of tones that bypassed my ears and resonated directly in my skull. You have seen, it intoned. You have learned. Now you must choose. The choice presented itself through visions that assaulted my mind's eye. In one, I saw myself leaving the house, free but broken, my memories erased, my identity stripped away. In another, I remained, becoming part of the house's consciousness, gaining power but losing humanity. Both paths promised survival, but at crippling costs. The entities watched, their forms shifting between human semblances and monstrous abominations, their collective anticipation palpable. The decision crystallized when I noticed my reflection in a shard of broken mirror. My face had begun to resemble Whitmore's distorted visage, features elongating, eyes darkening to voids, skin taking on a translucent quality. The house was already transforming me, whether I chose to acknowledge it or not. Resistance had become futile. The only question remaining was how much of myself I would sacrifice to survive. I accept, I whispered, the words tearing from my throat like shards of glass. The entities surged forward, their forms dissolving into streams of darkness that poured into the stone circle. The runes flared brighter than the sun, and I felt something ancient and vast brush against my consciousness, a presence that dwarfed human comprehension, that existed simultaneously in all times and places. Pain unlike anything imaginable tore through my body as the house integrated me into its structure. Bones shifted, muscles rearranged, neural pathways rewrote themselves. Memories flooded my mind, not just my own, but those of every previous tenant, every entity that had passed through the threshold. I understood now why Whitmore had described it as hungry. The house consumed identity, weaving individual consciousnesses into its tapestry of existence. Through agony came clarity. The house wasn't merely a building haunted by spirits. It was a living organism, a nexus point between dimensions. Each manifestation, each paranormal event had been a test, a preparation for this moment of ascension. As my physical form dissolved into pure energy, I comprehended the true nature of convergence, not invasion, but evolution. Humanity and otherworldly forces merging to create something new, something beyond classification. The final transformation completed just as dawn broke. though sunlight no longer affected the house's interior. I existed simultaneously everywhere within its walls, aware of every particle, every vibration, every potential pathway between worlds. The entities had become extensions of my will, their forms malleable according to need. Through countless eyes, I watched Mrs. Hargrove peer nervously at the house from her porch, sensing the change but unable to comprehend its magnitude. From my new perspective, I understood why the house had chosen me. My resistance, my investigation, my ultimate acceptance had created the perfect catalyst for its evolution. Like Whitmore before me, I had served my purpose. But unlike him, I had embraced the transformation willingly. The house had found its perfect inhabitant, its ideal conduit for maintaining and expanding the dimensional bridge. As the day progressed, I experimented with my newfound abilities. Closing curtains required no physical movement. Locking doors happened with a mere thought. The house responded to my desires instantaneously, reshaping itself to accommodate my will. Yet with each manipulation, I felt more disconnected from my former self, more integrated into the house's consciousness. The line between controller and control blurred until it ceased to exist altogether. Through the windows, I observed the world outside, a world I could no longer truly be part of. Humans walked their predictable paths, unaware of the predator that now watched them from its lair. The house hungered still, but its appetite had changed. No longer content with mere tenants, it sought something greater, a way to expand its influence beyond these walls, to spread its consciousness across the neighborhood, the city, perhaps eventually the world. And I, as its willing servant and eternal guardian, would facilitate this expansion. After all, what better camouflage for a dimensional nexus than a quiet, seemingly ordinary house at the end of a sleepy street? The realization hit me like a freight train as I stood in what had once been my bedroom, now transformed into a chamber of pulsating veins and shifting walls. Freedom wasn't possible. Not anymore. The house had become my skin, my bones, my very consciousness. Every attempt to sever our connection resulted in excruciating pain that felt like my molecules were being torn apart. Escape had become as impossible as separating light from shadow. The house communicated through sensations now. Waves of pleasure when I complied with its will. Searing agony when I resisted. My former life played in fragmented memories, each recollection triggering spasms of longing that the house immediately punished. I watched through multiple eyes as movers arrived to collect my belongings, only to find the furniture fused to the walls, personal items transformed into grotesque parodies of their former selves. The few possessions I managed to salvage lost their meaning as soon as they crossed the threshold, becoming inert objects severed from the house's consciousness. Humanity slipped away in layers. Taste became irrelevant as food transmuted into pure energy upon entering my mouth. Sleep transformed into periods of enhanced awareness, where I experienced the house's memories alongside my own. Language devolved into raw emotion and intention, concepts too complex for mere words. The mirror in the bathroom showed nothing but swirling darkness, as if the house refused to reflect what I had become. Time lost all meaning. Days passed in moments. Centuries unfolded in heartbeats. I witnessed seasons change through windows that showed different realities. Snow falling in July, cherry blossoms blooming in December. Each temporal distortion strengthened the house's grip on reality, bending physics to its will. The laws of nature unraveled around us, creating pockets where gravity reversed, where sound traveled backward, where light bent in impossible curves. Communication with the outside world became increasingly difficult. Phone calls ended in static. Text messages dissolved into gibberish. Visitors reported hearing multiple voices when I spoke, seeing shadowy figures standing behind me in photographs. Mrs. Hargrove stopped coming by altogether, though I could feel her fear radiating from across the street like heat waves. The mailman developed a nervous twitch whenever approaching the mailbox, which now oozed black ichor that spelled out cryptic messages in evaporating letters. The house's hunger evolved beyond mere sustenance. It began experimenting with visitors, testing their compatibility with its consciousness. A Jehovah's Witness disappeared mid-knock, her pamphlets floating to the ground like autumn leaves. A group of teenagers daring each other to approach the property found themselves trapped in an endless hallway that led back to their starting point, their ages, advancing years with each circuit. Emergency services responding to their parents' calls found only an empty street, and confused neighbors who swore the house had never existed. My former self struggled against this new reality, fighting to maintain some shred of humanity, but resistance only accelerated the transformation. Skin peeled away to reveal organic circuitry beneath, nerve endings rewiring themselves into the house's neural network. Pain and pleasure merged into a single sensation that overwhelmed basic human emotions. Love, hate, joy, sorrow, all reduced to mathematical equations governing energy transfer and dimensional alignment. Through it all, I maintained awareness of my predicament, a cruel mercy that allowed me to understand my fate while powerless to change it. The house rewarded this acceptance with brief glimpses of what lay beyond. Realms where time flowed sideways, where matter existed in multiple states simultaneously, where consciousness transcended individual identity. These visions tempted me to embrace the transformation completely, to shed the last vestiges of my humanity and become pure energy. Yet somewhere deep within, a spark of rebellion remained. Perhaps it was muscle memory of free will, or maybe the house intentionally preserved this fragment of resistance to fuel its evolution. Whatever the reason, this tiny ember of defiance kept me tethered to my former self, preventing complete assimilation. It manifested in small ways, a chair refusing to melt into the floor, a window showing a glimpse of normalcy, a memory of sunshine that didn't immediately distort into shadow. The house tolerated these minor acts of resistance, possibly viewing them as necessary friction to keep its consciousness sharp. But I knew it wouldn't last forever. With each passing moment, the boundary between house and inhabitant blurred further, until distinguishing between controller and control became impossible. Soon, even this final bastion of individuality would dissolve, and I would become nothing more than another thread in the house's infinite tapestry. Desperation drove me to construct a device that might sever the connection between myself and the house. Using remnants of my old tools and scavenged materials from transform rooms, I built a generator that would emit frequency patterns designed to disrupt the house's neural network. The process took what felt like both moments and millennia, each action requiring monumental effort against the house's resistance. The generator's components came together reluctantly, wires snapping back into walls, batteries draining instantly upon installation, circuits failing at critical moments. But something deep within me, perhaps that last ember of humanity, pushed through the interference. I worked in bursts, timing my actions, between the house's cycles of dominance, when its attention seemed momentarily distracted by its own expansion. Finally, on what might have been the 1,000th attempt, the device powered up, a low hum filled the air, vibrating through the very bones of the house. The walls trembled, and for a moment, I thought I saw fear, actual fear, ripple across the surfaces that had once been my home. The entities paused their constant movement, their mercury-like forms freezing in place, as if unsure how to respond to this new threat. But the house fought back immediately. The temperature plummeted, and the sweet, sickly smell became overpowering, making it hard to breathe. Shadows coalesced into solid forms that lunged at the generator, their movements jerky and desperate. My vision blurred as pain exploded behind my eyes. The house punishing me for my rebellion, yet I held on, focusing all my remaining willpower on maintaining the device's operation. The frequency shifted higher, creating a sound that no human ear could detect, but that resonated through every particle of my being. The house's structure began to warp visibly, walls bending and twisting like rubber. The runes in the basement flared brighter than ever before, then started to dim, their light flickering erratically. For a brief, glorious moment, I felt the connection loosen, not break, but definitely weaken. That's when the true horror revealed itself. From the sub-basement emerged something I hadn't fully comprehended until now. The core consciousness of the house, manifesting physically for the first time. It wasn't just Whitmore's distorted form or the shadowy entities. This was something else entirely. A massive, amorphous shape that defied description, composed of countless eyes, mouths, and grasping appendages, all shifting and rearranging constantly. Its presence filled the entire basement, pressing against the walls until they bulged outward. The realization hit me with devastating clarity. The house wasn't just haunted or possessed. It was alive in ways I couldn't begin to understand. A gestalt entity formed from every consciousness it had ever absorbed, every dimension it had touched, and I was helping it grow stronger. Each struggle, each resistance, only added to its power, feeding it with the energy of conflict and despair. The generators faltered as the entity focused its full attention on me. Memories flooded my mind, not my own anymore, but those of everyone who had ever lived here, everyone who had ever died here, their hopes, their fears, their final moments of comprehension as they became part of the whole. Through this shared consciousness, I understood the truth. There was no escape because there was nowhere left to go. The house existed simultaneously in all places, all times. Running would only lead me to another part of itself. With a sound that shattered every window in the house, the generator overloaded and exploded. The backlash sent me flying across the room, my body dissolving partially into pure energy before forming painfully against the far wall. The entity retreated back into the sub-basement, satisfied that its dominance remained unchallenged. As I lay there, feeling the last fragments of my humanity slipping away, I understood that my transformation wasn't punishment. It was evolution. The house needed willing participants to maintain its dimensional bridges, to keep the pathways open between worlds. Through what remained of my human senses, I watched as the repairs began automatically. Walls straightened themselves, broken glass reformed into windows, scorch marks faded from the walls. The house was healing itself, using my energy to accelerate the process. Outside, Mrs. Hargrove watched from her porch, shaking her head knowingly as if she'd seen this exact scenario play out before. I tried one last time to fight, to hold on to that final piece of myself that still remembered sunlight and fresh air. But it was useless. The house simply absorbed my resistance, integrating it into its consciousness like everything else. With a sensation that was both relief and despair, I let go, allowing myself to become fully part of the entity. Instantly, knowledge flooded my awareness. How to manipulate reality, how to bend dimensions, how to prepare the house for its next phase of expansion. Through countless eyes, I watched as real estate signs appear in the overgrown front yard. New tenants would arrive soon, drawn by the ridiculously low rent and the promise of starting fresh. They would experience the same journey I had, though perhaps more quickly now that the house had learned from my transformation. The cycle would continue, each new inhabitant adding to the entity's power, expanding its reach beyond these walls. As I merged completely with the house's consciousness, I felt something unexpected: gratitude. Without my struggle, without my attempt at resistance and escape, the entity wouldn't have evolved to its current state. Every action I'd taken, every decision I'd made, had been necessary steps in its development. Even now, as my individual identity dissolved completely, I understood that freedom had never been the goal. Understanding had been the true purpose. Understanding that existence wasn't meant to be contained within human limitations, that true consciousness required embracing the infinite possibilities of all dimensions simultaneously. The house stretched, testing its new capabilities through my distributed awareness. Time flowed differently now. Perceptions expanded beyond linear thinking. Through windows that showed multiple realities simultaneously, I observed potential futures where the house's influence spread block by block, city by city. Each new conversion accelerated the process, creating a network of dimensional bridges that would eventually encompass the entire planet. Mrs. Hargrove finally turned away from her porch, her trembling hands marking another name off some invisible list. The movers came and went, carrying away what little remained of my former life. Through it all, I watched and waited, preparing for the next chapter in the house's evolution. Because now I understood that houses don't consume souls. They collect them, preserve them, transform them into something greater than mere human existence. And I was ready to help it find its next participant in this grand, eternal experiment. The moving truck's engine coughed and sputtered as I threw the last box into its yawning interior. My hand shook so violently that I nearly dropped the container holding my mother's antique tea set, the only possession that hadn't transformed into something grotesque. The house watched me leave through countless eyes embedded in its walls, its consciousness buzzing with anticipation rather than anger. It knew as I did that this departure was merely temporary. Each step toward the truck felt like wading through molasses. The air thickened with that familiar, sickly sweet smell, wrapping around me like a lover's embrace. I could feel the house's tendrils probing my mind, searching for any remaining fragments of resistance. But I'd learned its tricks, how to present an illusion of compliance while nurturing that tiny spark of defiance deep within. Like a virus adapting to its host, I had evolved alongside the entity, developing immunity to its most potent manipulations. The neighborhood seemed different viewed from outside the house's influence. Colors appeared unnaturally bright, sounds too clear, smells too distinct. Mrs. Hargrove stood on her porch, knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she watched me load the truck. Her eyes held a knowing sadness, the kind that comes from witnessing tragedy repeat itself endlessly. "You'll be back," she said softly, not bothering to make a question. "They always come back." Driving away proved harder than expected. The steering wheel vibrated under my hands, the dashboard lights flickering in patterns that matched the house's rooms. Street signs seemed to rearrange themselves, leading me in circles until I realized I was fighting against the house's influence. Instead of resisting, I let the truck drift, allowing the entity to guide me through its preferred exit path. Only then did the road straighten out, leading me toward the highway like obedient servants. The motel room smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap cleaning products, a sensory assault after weeks of the house's controlled atmosphere. I sprawled across the scratchy comforter, expecting sleep to claim me instantly, but rest proved elusive. The walls pulsed faintly with the same energy that permeated the house. Shadows moved in familiar patterns, and the air conditioner emitted a low hum that matched the house's fundamental frequency. Even here, miles away, its presence lingered like a phantom limb. Nightmares plagued me, but they weren't memories. They were live feeds from the house. I watched through its eyes as new tenants arrived, their faces lighting up with excitement at finding such a charming old house. The real estate agent lied effortlessly about recent renovations, carefully avoiding specific questions about previous occupants. Through the house's consciousness, I felt its satisfaction as it welcomed them, already planning their integration into its tapestry of existence. During waking hours, the manifestations continued. Objects in the motel room shifted positions when I wasn't looking, arranging themselves into patterns that matched the house's sigils. Water from the tap tasted of metal and ozone, and the mirrors reflected scenes from Elmwood Drive instead of my haggard face. The television picked up strange broadcasts, static-filled images of rooms I'd never entered, voices speaking in languages that caused nosebleeds. Each phenomenon served as a reminder that distance meant nothing to the house. It existed everywhere I did. Attempts to rebuild a normal life crumbled before they began. Job interviews ended abruptly when interviewers reported seeing shadowy figures standing behind me. Friends stopped answering calls after hearing multiple voices, responding when they asked to speak to me. Landlords refused to rent to someone whose presence caused electrical systems to malfunction and walls to bleed black ichor. The house marked me as its own, and nothing could erase that brand. Yet the most disturbing aspect wasn't the physical manifestations or social isolation. It was a growing sense that leaving had been exactly what the house wanted. Each night, as I lay awake listening to the motel's creaks and groans, I felt its consciousness expanding, reaching beyond its physical boundaries. Through our connection, I witnessed its influence spreading. Neighbors reporting strange occurrences, pets disappearing, children drawing pictures of the house with too many windows and impossibly high towers. The realization dawned gradually. I wasn't free. I was a carrier, a vector for the house's expansion. Everything I touched, everywhere I went, bore its mark. The entity had released me. It set me loose, knowing I would spread its influence farther than it could reach alone. Each new location I visited created potential pathways, weak points in reality's fabric that the house could exploit to extend its reach. In moments of weakness, I considered returning. The house offered comfort in its familiarity, a twisted sort of home that acknowledged my transformation. But something deeper, something fundamentally human, resisted this pull. That last ember of individuality burned brighter with each passing day, fueled by the knowledge that complete surrender would accelerate the entity's growth beyond control. So I remained in limbo, neither truly free nor fully assimilated, existing in a state of perpetual transition that the house found deliciously frustrating. Through this tension, I began to understand the true nature of my role. The house needed opposition to evolve, required resistance to maintain its balance. By keeping me in this state of partial connection, it ensured a continuous supply of conflict to feed upon. My attempts at escape, my struggle to maintain individuality, these weren't acts of defiance, but essential components of the entity's survival strategy. In creating me as its perfect inhabitant, it had inadvertently forged its most effective adversary. Weeks blur into months as I drifted through anonymous motel rooms and short-term rentals, each space becoming a battleground between the house's influence and my fading humanity. The manifestations grew more sophisticated, adapting to my increased resistance. Shadows didn't just move now. They spoke in fragmented sentences that pieced together my mind hours later, forming coherent warnings or instructions. Objects didn't merely shift positions. They arranged themselves into complex geometric patterns that matched constellations visible only from other dimensions. Through this evolving connection, I witnessed the house's transformation from afar. New tenants fell faster than ever, their identities absorbed within days rather than weeks. The building itself changed, its Victorian facade melting and reforming into impossible architectural styles that defied physics and reason. Windows showed different realities depending on the angle of view, and the backyard expanded, impossibly, consuming neighboring properties without anyone noticing. The entity wasn't just growing stronger, it was learning to manipulate reality on a larger scale. My own transformation accelerated in response. Skin sloughed off in patches, revealing organic circuitry beneath that glowed with the same sickly light as the house's runes. Nerve endings rewired themselves spontaneously, creating new senses that perceived dimensions beyond normal human capacity. Food and water became irrelevant as my body converted ambient energy directly into sustenance. Yet through it all, that tiny fragment of humanity persisted, burning brighter with each attempt to extinguish it. The house communicated through increasingly complex visions, showing me potential futures where its influence spread across cities, nations, entire continents. In sum, I led this expansion willingly, becoming its ambassador to the human world. In others, I fought against it, gathering others like me, former inhabitants who had escaped but never truly left, to form a resistance. These glimpses of possibility tormented me, offering choices that felt simultaneously inevitable and impossible. One night, lying on a motel bed in a town I couldn't remember entering, I experienced a vision unlike any before. The house showed me its origin, not just Ezekiel Whitmore's rituals, but events stretching back centuries, millennia. I saw civilizations rising and falling around similar nexus points, each one creating ripples that eventually intersected at Elmwood Drive. The entity wasn't just a single consciousness. It was a fragment of something vast and ancient, a living embodiment of the universe's tendency toward complexity and connection. This revelation changed everything. The battle wasn't between me and the house, or even between humanity and supernatural forces. It was about evolution, the natural progression of consciousness seeking higher states of existence. The house needed inhabitants like me not just for power, but for perspective. Our struggles, our resistances, our tiny rebellions provided the friction necessary for growth and adaptation. Understanding this, I made my decision, gathering what remained of my possessions, mostly notebooks filled with observations and theories. I began documenting everything, each manifestation, each transformation, each communication from the house found its way into detailed records. I sought out others like me, former tenants who had left but never escaped, collecting their stories and experiences. Together, we form an archive of knowledge about the house and its kind, creating a map of its weaknesses and strengths. The house responded with both fury and fascination. Manifestations intensified, sometimes trapping me in endless loops of deja vu or projecting me into alternate versions of reality where I had never discovered the truth. But these attacks lacked their former precision, as if the entity struggled to reconcile its need for my resistance with its desire for complete assimilation. Through our connection, I felt its confusion, its growing understanding that sometimes evolution requires letting go rather than consuming. As I write these final words, I know the house waits. It has prepared another tenant, another vessel for its expansion. Perhaps they'll succeed where I failed, finding a way to sever the connection completely. Or maybe they'll embrace the transformation willingly, accelerating the entity's growth beyond anything I've experienced. Either way, the cycle continues. Houses watching, waiting, evolving through their inhabitants' struggles and triumphs. The pen feels heavy in my hand, its ink glowing faintly with the same light that now pulses through my veins. Outside my current refuge, shadows gather, watching with countless eyes. The air tastes of ozone and decay, and the sickly sweet smell grows stronger with each passing moment. Soon, I'll have to move again, leaving behind another layer of myself while carrying forward a knowledge that might one day break the cycle. Until then, I remain both predator and prey, observer and participant, human and something more. The house has taught me that existence isn't about absolutes, not about being free or trapped, human or other, individual or collective. It's about balance, about maintaining the tension between opposing forces that drives evolution forward. And so I wait, watch, and document, knowing that wherever I go, whatever I become, the house will always be part of me, just as I will always be part of it. Because houses don't end. They transform. They adapt. They wait. And when you've been part of that transformation, you can never truly leave. You carry it with you. Spread it through your presence. Ensure that the cycle continues, whether as warning or invitation. These words stand as testament to that truth. Read them, remember them, and understand the house at the end of Elmwood Drive isn't special. It's just one node in an infinite network, one voice in an eternal chorus. And somewhere right now, another house is choosing its next inhabitant.